Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Price, and I'm a psychology professor here at Georgetown. And one of the things I'm going to talk to you about today is a problem that many college students face, and that's test anxiety. I'd like you to think for a minute about experiences you've had where you studied really hard for a test, but then when you got it, you just blanked and forgot everything. If you've had that happen to you, then you know exactly what I mean. Even if that hasn't happened, probably all of us have felt a little bit of anxiety when preparing for a test. And so there are a lot of strategies that you can use to try to improve your performance. So I'm going to go over a few of those right now. Before we do that though, it would be helpful for you to know exactly what your level of test anxiety is. So I have a questionnaire for you to fill out. It's not a test, so don't be nervous. Let's start by giving that out, and then we'll come back together and see how you did. So the survey you just took is called the Test Anxiety Index. The scores on this test range from 5 to 20. So if you scored a 5 or 6, even 7, that means you have relatively low test anxiety. If you have a score above 10, it means you have at least a moderate amount or even a high amount of test anxiety. So if you're in the high level, I would really encourage you to pay special attention to the techniques I'm about to discuss. But even if your anxiety was low, these things can be helpful for you no matter what. One of the problems that test anxious people often face is that they don't do a lot of preparation for an exam, because even just taking the time to study increases their anxiety because they don't want to think about the test they're about to take. But that strategy can really backfire, because the more prepared you are, the less anxious you'll actually be when you go take the exam. So the first strategy is just to spend your time preparing way in advance. Attending classes, taking notes, all the regular study skills that you've been learning about in freshman seminar and in other areas this semester really will help you when you're taking a test as well. A few of the other strategies that are more specific to test anxiety have to do with studying in a distraction-free environment and engaging in something called distributed practice. You all know what a distraction-free environment is. You might think that you currently study in a distraction-free environment, but if you study with music on or with people around, those really can be distractions. Even though it seems like it's more fun to study that way, a lot of times it can interfere with your ability to learn without even you realizing. Study often. It really does not work to cram the night before a test. What research has shown is most helpful is to study over smaller periods of time in the days leading up to an exam, and just to practice, just like you've learned your whole life on how to get better at something. In terms of personal strategies, there are a few other things that you can do that will help you prepare and not be as anxious in the days leading up to an exam. One of those, it may sound a little silly, but it really is helpful, and that's engaging in self-talk. Self-talk is when you basically, in your mind, not out loud, talk to yourself about things that you can do to prepare and things that you can do to feel successful about your ability to prepare for the test. You can also engage in relaxation exercises, even if you're not feeling particularly anxious. If you practice relaxation on a daily basis, it lowers your overall anxiety so that when something does happen that makes you feel nervous, you don't get to that high anxiety, high panic so quickly. Related to that, you can also practice taking slow breaths. Many times people think that taking deep breaths is helpful, but especially when you're anxious, taking deep breaths means you take in more oxygen, which makes you more likely to hyperventilate, which we want to avoid. So the better strategy is to just slow down your breathing and focus on the exhale instead of taking in more air. While the strategies that I've talked about are generally helpful in the days leading up to the exam, sometimes people engage in those things and they still feel really nervous when the exam is about to start. In that case, there are a few things that I can recommend for the day of the exam. One is limit your caffeine intake. Now, I am a dedicated coffee drinker. I know many of you are too. Red Bull, Dr. Pepper, whatever it is. The thing is, though, that caffeine, levels of caffeine, can actually mimic high anxiety. So if you're already feeling nervous and then you drink a lot of caffeine, you will feel even more nervous than you were before. So that's one surefire way to reduce your anxiety on the test day. Another strategy is to, again, compare to when their mood is neutral compared to when it's negative. And the people in a happy mood actually performed better on complex problem-solving tasks. So get in a happy mood. One of the ways you can do that is actually a strategy that has been demonstrated in research too, specifically to help test anxiety, and that is spending a few minutes thinking about or writing about positive, successful experiences. Students in this study who did that actually felt happier, they felt more optimistic, they were more likely to see their test as a challenge rather than a threat, and then the most important part, they actually performed better on the test. So I would encourage you to think about doing that. Again, just taking a few moments before the test, writing out a few things that you know you really have done well in the past, and that will help uplift your mood and help you perform better on the test. The last thing I want to talk about is during the actual test. There are some really specific things that people find helpful during a test to lower anxiety. One of those is monitoring your time. Sometimes people think paying attention to the time will increase your anxiety because you'll worry that you won't finish. But if you don't keep some track of the time, you can end up getting to a point where you're not able to finish, and then of course your anxiety goes through the roof. So focus on answering the questions that you know. The ones that you read and you think, I'm not sure about that, it's really helpful to just skip it and move on so you don't sit spinning your wheels trying to remember something that you just can't remember. If you move on, a lot of times something that you read on the exam later will trigger your memory, and you can go back and answer that question without having to waste your time thinking about it in that original moment. So just keep moving, focus on the things that you do know, monitor your time. And the last thing is, feel free to ask questions. Professors are happy to answer your questions during an exam. Sometimes we can tell you things that will help explain what we're really getting after, and that will help you be able to tell us and show us what you really know instead of misunderstanding a question. Once you finish the exam, just turn it in and leave it there. A lot of times people are so anxious about their test that they worry about it for hours or even days after they take it. But that's not helpful. It's over, it's done. You have to focus now on the next thing that you've got to do. And if you end up doing well on the exam, that's great. Reward yourself, celebrate a bit. But if you don't do so well, it's really important not to get caught up in that and spend your time thinking about that one bad grade that's already passed instead of spending your time on what you can do to improve in the future. Of course, talk to your professor and don't completely forget about it, but don't waste your time worrying when you could be focusing on things that you can do to improve. I'll leave you with one important fact in the psychological research, and that is that moderate anxiety actually maximizes performance. So it's unrealistic to think that you'll never be anxious about taking a test, but that's actually a good thing because that anxiety can motivate you to do your best. So challenge yourself and stay focused on using the resources that you have here, and you will succeed.